with what I'm going to talk about. I'm just taking a kind of different perspective. I've been creating some open software for about 6 or 7 years now, and currently I'm working as a security engineer on a web browser. And during these years, we've heard more and more about diversity and inclusion in both in the tech industry and in open source software communities. And so there is something that bothers me in the way most of the debates on the policies and the way the conversation are framed about diversity and inclusion, because I feel like we focus on some symptoms, which is really important, is great, but we miss somehow the root cause of everything. And basically, it's about power. It's about power. We can consider power as maybe a capacity that can be distributed among individuals, but that's not enough. We can't say, okay, to fix issues, for example, because there are not enough women in the tech industry, we need to open more positions filled by women. It's not enough because it won't take into account the larger structures of power which shape the individual power relationships in our society. They can be social, can be institutional, at school, in your family, in a company, etc. So power is also something that we can think of as power relationships, power domination, and so on. So when I talk about sharing power, really what I mean is about having empowerment from an individual and a collective point of view. I'm talking about power relationships. So what does it mean to be on the better side of this relationship? First, it will mean that I'm legitimate to occupy space, that I feel legitimate, and that people consider I'm legitimate. Occupy space, it can be physical space, it can be the fact that I'm here standing on the stage, I'm talking to people who are listening to us. I'm in a position of power right now. It means that my opinion is considered as more legitimate than the opinion of people who won't be in my position. It means also, very important, that I can make the decisions for myself, but also from others. And it means also that people in general will have fewer negative prejudices against me. And also, especially when I'm having some behavior that is unexpected or what. Okay, so what can we do? We can change the rules in our communities. The title of my talk is Sharing Power in Our Communities. And even if we are living in a society where we have learned norms and way of behaving and so on, we are creating some space, some community, some group, some collective, where we can actually decide how we want to organize ourselves and how we want to interact with each other. So we can try to dismantle power inequalities and the norms that we have learned, consciously or unconsciously. So first, we have to become more aware of how we interact with each other. So there is a very important phase of observing and listening. And then we can change how we debate, how we decide, how we collaborate, and how we make things together. So these are my goals, 3 goals. The first one, I want to organize myself within a group to neutralize hierarchies as much as possible. Then I want to be able to decide, and I want the group to be inside the group that we are able to decide together as much as possible. And I want this way of organizing to be empowering as much as possible. So these are 4 steps that I will dive into. The first one is observing and listening. The second one is to design a new way of organizing ourselves. The third step will be to implement this design. And the fourth step will be to test it. And when we are testing it, actually we will cycle back into the first phase to observe and listen how it is going on. So, first step, observing and listening. We can start by asking ourselves some questions. What we want to observe and listen is how we interact, how we function, and also we want to on who is silent, who listens but doesn't talk too much, and who is absent. It can be physically or just absent. I'm not here. People are talking about something and I don't feel that I'm part of this conversation. And so you can ask yourself who is paid, because it means that these people will have more time to contribute than other people who they just struggle to live. Who is legitimate or perceived as legitimate, who is considered to have some authority, who is enthusiastic, but also who is put aside, and who is angry. Might be interesting to look at who is angry. Anger is not necessarily a very appealing emotion, and people who are angry, we tend to want to dissociate from them. But anger is a reaction to something, and it might be a good thing during this observing phase to try to understand why they are upset or frustrated. Then I'm going to talk about the concept which is being marked. I'm taking this concept from the transfeminist Julia Serrano, which is adapting this concept from linguistics to activist work. And she's saying that some people, we perceive some people as having some characteristics, some traits, and some of them are unexpected or are standing out for ourselves. We have every one of us has a different filter, so we won't mark people the same way, depending on our background, our profile, our interests, and so on. So what Julia Serrano is saying, that people who are marked are generally viewed as having something that unmarked people do not have. That something can therefore be subjected to remarks, questions, debate, praise, or critique. The unmarked person escapes such critical analysis by virtue of the fact that they are not seen as having that something. So let's have an example. This is a picture taken from the movie. And basically what you can see is a group of people, of 7 people, 7 people. 6 of them are young Indian men, and the 7th people is a young woman playing football. Depending on your background, of your gender, of your race, of your sports, of your interest in sports, and so on, you might mark these people as, for example, being all Indian, or you might mark only one character in this scene as the single woman playing football, because you don't expect women to play football. So you are doing some marks. But you could also mark some of the people for not having shirts, for example. The thing is, in our society, we tend to mark people with unfairly single out and played by assumptions and stereotypes that the unmarked does not face. And in our society, these marks are roughly around, for example, some gender, race, sexual orientation, mental or physical abilities. But it could be also your profession, your type of personality, and so on.
So in this discussion, marks always
We will have some question after.
Okay. No, I just want to understand.
Okay,
Is it
so
always
with
negative?
these marks, people, we will develop double standards. Double standards take many forms. Universal assumption, for example, some people are doing this. There will be hierarchies, stereotypes, and attribution. There are also some forms of invalidation. This is that people who tend to be different or who have a behavior or idea that we don't expect, we could say that they are mentally incompetent, or they will be sexualized, or we will tend to see them as immoral, sick, anomalous, fake, inauthentic, and so on. So, but my point is to say, when you notice some of these assumptions, hierarchies, stereotypes, attributions, or some of these form of invalidations, just take one moment back, one step back, and analyze, take time to say, okay, is there something going on here, or is it legitimate? Then, I have 2 comments to make. The first one is about inclusion. We hear a lot about inclusion or inclusivity, and it's great. We need to ask ourselves some questions, though. The first thing is, who includes who? When we talk about inclusion, usually we focus on a group, which represent the majority or the dominant persons who are willing to include other people who are used to be excluded and in minority. So if the dominant group try to that is the case, then we have to ask ourselves, are we repeating some power patterns? Are we repeating things that drove away the excluded people at the first time? Then we need to adapt. If we say, okay, we want more, we like to say diverse people, it doesn't mean anything, but like basically more people who don't have the same characteristics that we have in our group presently. Do they need to adapt? For example, we say, okay, we want you into our group, but we want you to stay silent about, for example, your sexual orientation. This is not very fair. And also there is one interesting thing is, do we change how we make decisions? Because basically one good attribute of having power is being able to make decisions that we controlling difficult. So do we allow people who are excluded and that are now included into the group to take part into making the decisions and framing how they want to be part of the community? Second comment I want to make is about meritocracy and bureaucracy. We hear a lot about these two ways of organizations in open source software, and usually people tend to think that they are fair and they are efficient. But they won't prevent you to repeat power patterns and inequalities if you don't explicit and discuss some of the values and some of the processes inside meritocracy and bureaucracy. In particular, you have to ask yourself some questions. Who has access to resources to contribute? When inside the bureaucracy, the people having power are supposed to be the power being able to do, be able to contribute. But who has access to resources such as money, time, energy, self-confidence, etc.? This is a question, because if we think, okay, just because we are a bureaucracy, everyone can contribute. This is not the reality. And if we don't put in place some measures to take into account the diversity and the differences among the population we want to attract, then we are missing something here. And so, who really has the power and abilities to do? So we say the people who are doing so this is what the power and abilities to do. This is related to what I just said. Then, who makes decisions and according to which values? Because basically in the bureaucracy, we say the power is the person deciding is the person who is doing. But actually the person who is deciding is the person accepting the work that is done, which is a group of people part of the community. And according to which values are they deciding that a solution is better or is acceptable inside the frame of the community. One example, for example, if you are in a software community and you have a lot of developers, and you have a UX designer coming and proposing some work to improve what's currently in place, maybe the community of developers, those who can decide, we say, no, okay, UX design is not important, it already works like that. We don't want to accept your contribution. Because they won't have the same values and maybe have the same sensibility that UX design. That is something that needs to be discussed and explicited. What are the values? And so there is a risk of homogenization. When you contribute to something, you are a newcomer, you have more chance to have your work accepted if you are mentored and if you interact with the people from the community. But there can be some bias. That is, we tend to mentor and accept the work of people who are more like us. And we can have the bias of saying, okay, I want to spend more time on helping this person, because I think she has more abilities and she has more potential than, for example, some other people who doesn't speak my language, who isn't of the same gender. Finally, there is this argument that bureaucracy is more efficient for taking decisions and for moving forward. And there is this thing that, this idea that debating to have everybody agreeing on a decision would take a lot of time and can never happen, actually. So there is this idea that doing will be faster, but it doesn't question the fact that why do we need to be efficient and why do we need to go fast? And We have a relationship to time and speed that is a bit specific in our Western society. We need to go fast, we need to be efficient. But why? Even more in free software and open source communities, because we are more driven by the market, for example. So we can take some time to go to make things maybe slower, but maybe more inclusive and more fair. This doesn't mean that we don't need to be efficient in some context, or that some decisions doesn't need to be made very quickly. So it's a balance to find. So this is our toolbox for detecting power patterns, listening skills, double standards, form of validations, and organization mapping to see how people are interacting with each other and what are the hierarchies inside the community. Next step, designing. So here I'm following the example of permaculture. Permaculture is a way of designing dynamic and complex systems. It can be for your garden, it can be for your farm, it can be for your neighborhood, it can be for your house. And basically it doesn't tell you how to implement a sustainable and fair system that respects nature, environment, and human beings. But it gives you some principles to design your system that will be that will fit your resources and your own goals. And this is basically what I'm doing here. I will talk about general principles to design your own way of organizing yourselves and your community. But it doesn't mean that you don't need complete methods. Not at all. We need to learn and adapt to complete methods. A lot of them already exist. And we need also collective creativity. So, first thing, and maybe the most important one, everything changes. Yourself, as an individual, you are changing. Inside a community of people, the community is changing because there are newcomers, people are leaving. The tasks that you have to do as a community will change, your goals will change, and so on. So there is not a unique model in time and space. Also, a model, a way of organizing that will work for another group of people might not work for your group of people, because there are two different entities. Not a design principle. This one I like it, it's very personal, but paying attention to what and who is silent or absent. Usually we tend to focus on who we can hear, who is taking a lot of space, and so on. But paying attention to this side of absent is so important. Expect and respect emotions. We are living in a Western society where there is a tradition to oppose reason and emotions. And often there is a hierarchy because we think that reason is better than emotions. But emotions are also a reaction to something that is happening, and emotions are not necessarily irrational. So we need to take care of them. And also, we are inequal in the way we express emotions and we receive them. So just be open, we are all human, and we have emotions, especially, bad ones and good ones. Yeah, design principles. Rotate. One of my goals was to neutralize hierarchies as much as possible. This doesn't mean that there isn't specific roles inside your community. And some of these roles can imply more visibility or having some leadership role and so on. One way of keeping these roles that are important to move forward is to rotate and have different persons doing them over time. There is one thing though with that. We don't have all the same skills. We don't have all the same experience. And sometimes, for example, if you have a very important decision to make and you have this meeting where it's going to happen and you want really to be efficient in there, you might want somebody who has experience and some wisdom and some skills in leading this meeting. This is okay. What you can do is to design a process to have other people who don't have the skills yet, who don't have this experience yet, to learn them. So maybe you will have less important meetings where you will engage people to take these leadership roles and gain some experience there. And that can be part of the way you imagine the whole organization. And then when these people will have more experience, they can take this very important role during this very important meeting. And that's how, over time, you can rotate roles and neutralize hierarchies, because it will just go flat. And finally, remember that the ideal system doesn't exist, but you can get closer to something that is more fair. To do that, you have to learn and adapt methods. A lot of them already exist. These are some that I experimented myself. Making decisions with collective consensus. We tend to think that having the agreement of everybody is very difficult to get, but if you frame, there are some methods that frame this way of getting consensus in an interesting way. For example, it could be everybody agrees to make this decision if nobody has a strong objection against it. It's another way to frame it, and it works pretty well actually. Then you could use sortation for some roles, for example. Rotation of roles, I talked about it, and games, which are interesting, especially role-playing games. So we can understand how each other can think differently, for example. Some people will tend to frame things in a negative way and see all the drawbacks. Some people will only see the positive sides. But if you have a role-playing game and exchange the two roles, then maybe we can start to understand more each other. And more general methods about communicating, learning to communicate by being gender inclusive, questioning stereotypes and insults are part of our everyday language that are harmful, and accessibility. The third step is implementing. There is a sociologist called Robert Sennett who wrote a book called Together, and in this book he studies cooperation and what makes good cooperation. And basically he says that cooperation is like a craft, and it needs goodwill and skills to be developed. And he talks in particular about dialogic skills, which are listening well, behaving tactfully, finding points of agreement and managing disagreements, and avoiding frustration in difficult conversation. So these are 4 skills that are useful to get good cooperation working inside a collective. I will add another layer, which is being informed of social realities and inequalities. To get knowledge in context and history, and to have some empathy to be able to understand the point of view of another person from their own perspective. So basically what I'm saying is that sharing power is also a craft. A craft which needs goodwill, dialogic skills, knowledge in power patterns, and knowledge of yourself, which is important. To know with what is the filter, which filter you are considering the world, and if you get to take a lot of space, depending on your personality, or if you tend to get angry more often than others, and so on. You also need to know when to speak up and when to stay silent to let more space for other people. Sometimes it's difficult to find a balance. One trick can be to bolster voices of others when you want to take position and doesn't want to take too much space. Learn what's different between what's anecdotal and systemic. The impact of your impact will be the same, and your reaction will be the same. And when you mess up, and it's always happening, and that's okay, just acknowledge, apologize, and stop the harmful behavior if somebody tells you something. The last step is testing it. One thing to remember, we are not checklists, so we won't get it right the first time, and that's fine. We just have to go back to the first step, which is observing and listening what's happening, and adapt and change what's not working. Yeah. Conclusion. So basically, what I'm proposing is organizing ourselves. Each group of people can have the freedom and the creativity to organize their own way of functioning. And basically, we're creating a world made of multiple worlds. There isn't one hierarchy that will work, one way of functioning that will work. if we are looking at how most of our companies are working today, it's often according to 1, 2, or 3 models. And so it's repeating also the same patterns. We are, most of us here, I think, are contributing to free open source software. And this kind of communities already have a political goal, which is creating, sharing, and nurturing commons. And this is already an alternative project inside our capitalist world, developing commons. And if we add this dimension of developing more social equality and of dismantling power burdens, then we have a very good chance, very good shot at creating alternative political spaces, functioning in a different way, solving issues that maybe we think are unsolvable right now. And I think that in these days, it's very important to have in mind that this is actually possible and that people are actually doing it. And we have ways and methods to do that. So thank you for your attention. I will be here outside for answering your questions or your in the slide that will be on the FOSDEM website, I've put some resources both online and books in English, Spanish, and French if you want to go further. Any question? Yes.
Yeah, earlier this question that I think you said any classification is actually a negative thing. Is that what you said?
Any classification is a negative thing? No.
Yeah, I think at the very beginning you said you classify people and so on, and I have the impression that you said every classification is a negative thing for the group you classify.
No, so I didn't use the term classification. And also, so I think you refer to having marking people.
Yeah, marking.
Yeah,
yeah.
okay. So you can mark people in a negative or positive way, and you can also not mark people. It's very relative to your background. For example, quick example, you are in a room and it's full of white men doing open source software, and there is one woman. This woman will be marked. But maybe not by you if you are used to contribute with women, but other people who are not used might notice that she's here and asking themselves about it. Oh, it can be positive. Oh, yes, there is a woman. But you won't say, oh, yes, there are so many men. You know? So the difference in the way you would perceive them. It's not necessarily a negative thing. Yes.
Why do you think a privileged person would be in this position if being privileged and start questioning the norms? And
that's a good question. That's a good question. I think there are several parts in my answer. The first one is you could appeal to the sense of justice, of fairness of these people. You could also appeal to the sense of empathy. Some people, there is this experience when you are talking with people about a political topic or about privileges and so on, and they will defend the point of view. And if you ask them a question or say, and what about, I don't know, your sister or your boyfriend or whatever, they will start to imagine themselves into a position or feel themselves that they are concerned. The issue with these privileges and these norms and so on is that we tend not to question them. And it's very difficult to get conscious about it and try to dig into it. And basically, it's like taking the pills in Matrix, you know? It's discovering a whole new world, and you are put in a position that is not very comfortable. So I would say some people do put themselves into question. It can take time. Usually, it won't happen during the debate, but during the conversation you're having with them. It might happen 3 months after. But yeah, I think it can be very hard, but I've seen people change, personally, I mean, and I know a lot of people who are advocating for some new ideas and they're doing it for a purpose because they know it's actually having an impact. So, yeah.
or probably people start questioning when they see that it's also harmful to themselves, being privileged.
Yeah. One question?
You mentioned sortition.
Yeah.
What is that? What does that mean?
So when in French it's tirage au sort. In English it's when you have a bunch of it's like you pick randomly people inside a group and you don't decide who will be the chosen one. It's just random. Sorry, lottery, like lottery. Yeah.
I found the idea of rotating roles very interesting, but I have trouble imagining how it worked. Can you maybe explain what experiences you had with it?
For example, let's say a quick example. You're during a meeting